Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will be back with you shortly in about no more than 2 minutes. We are just letting all the attendees come into the webinar. Thank you. Welcome again, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging Incorporated, NCBA, and the National Center on Elder Abuse for our webinar on caregiving and elder mistreatment. Our presenter today, Ms. Laurie Mars, is Assistant Professor of Family Medicine at the Keck School of Medicine, University of Southern California, and the Director of the National Center on Elder Abuse, Keck School of Medicine, University of Southern California. Ms. Mars received her Juris Doctorate degree from Loyola Law School and her Master's of Law degree from the University of Southern California. So thank you, Laurie, and welcome. We appreciate you being here with us to educate us even more on elder mistreatment. Welcome, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's great to be here today with all of you. And thank you so much, Angela and Angie, for inviting me here today and for hosting this presentation. I'm Laurie Mars, and with the National Center on Elder Abuse, as you heard. The National Center on Elder Abuse is one of 9 elder justice resource centers funded by the Administration for Community Living, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And we're housed at the Keck School of Medicine at USC. We provide the latest information and resources on research, training, education, policy, and best practices in elder abuse education. And our goal is to ensure that older adults are treated with dignity and respect, free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So today I'm going to be speaking about caregiving and elder mistreatment. And I'm going to introduce the caregiving conversation by drawing from a column from the New York Times. It's called the Ethicist column, and it's a regular column written by philosopher and professor Kwame Anthony Appiah, and he responds to ethical dilemmas that are submitted by readers. This particular column is about caregiving, and it was written in June, and it's called, "I Think My Husband Has Dementia. Can I Leave Him?" So I'm going to quote from portions of his column. I strongly suspect that my husband is developing dementia. His doctors have found nothing wrong with him. I understand that cognition tests might not find anything wrong in the early stages of disease. In the meantime, our decades-long relationship has eroded. My insistence that he engage with me in a quality relationship has led to endless fighting and brought me to the brink of divorce. I understand that dementia is at the root of our problems and have quit trying to fix our relationship. The fighting has stopped, but it's a lonely place to be. I'm not thrilled about spending my retirement years as a caregiver. It's a huge sacrifice that will narrow my own life significantly. Do we both need to go down with the ship? Can I leave now and let his family deal with this? Or am I obligated to stay and care for him? So you may have a whole lot of reactions to this letter. I know I did when I first read it. And the ethicist provides a very nuanced and measured response that I'm going to share with you shortly. But I share this with you to acknowledge that caregiving can be very difficult. Even the prospect of caregiving can be frightening, as you can see from the letter. The benefits of providing care to a loved one can be profound, but there are also challenges as well. And we'll take a closer look at both today. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter said, "There are only four kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers." So if you want to put in the chat or show by virtual hands, if you're a caregiver, please share. I myself am currently a family caregiver, and growing up, I lived in part with my grandparents and provided care to them. And certainly this is an issue that impacts most, if not many of us. In 2020, there were approximately 53 million family caregivers in the US, and that's an increase from 43.5 million in 2015, and likely an underestimate of the number of caregivers in the US today. But millions of older adults and people with disabilities could not maintain their independence without the help of caregivers. The reality is that more than 2/3 of the US population will likely need help with tasks at some point in their lifetime. And with the increasing population of older adults, the need for caregivers will most certainly grow. The estimated economic value of caregiving in 2021 was a staggering $600 billion. So let's take a closer look at who are caregivers. They can be family members or friends who provide unpaid long-term community-based care and assistance to older adults and people with chronic health conditions or disabilities. There are also formal paid givers who provide assistance. But today I'm just going to talk about family caregiving. Family caregiving is an essential public health service and increasingly becoming an emerging public health issue as the need exceeds the prevailing and expected demand. Caregivers are often middle-aged and older adults. 53 to 68% are women, according to the Family Caregiver Alliance. Almost a third provide care at least 20 hours a week. 79% of caregivers provide care for adults age 50 and over, and 76% of care recipients are age 65 and older. And nearly a quarter of caregivers of an older or sick adult also have young children under the age of 18, which makes them part of that sandwich generation, taking care of their older parents and then also caring for the younger children they have at home. Black and African American caregivers comprise approximately 14% of caregivers overall, work the most unpaid hours of any race, averaging 31.4 hours weekly, and are more often involved in high-intensity caregiving. Frequently, Black and African American caregivers receive no paid or unpaid caregiving help and are often younger than white caregivers. They're often unmarried, have poor health, and frequently balance caregiving with full-time jobs. So what do caregivers do? They do many things. They serve an incredibly important role, helping others maintain their quality of life, independence, and physical and social well-being to the extent possible. And this can include any number of tasks, from assisting with medication management, financial management, going to the grocery store, preparing food, transportation, all kinds of things, depending on the care recipient's particular needs. And add to that the many hours that caregivers spend serving as advocates on behalf of loved ones. Caregivers offer critical emotional support and social connectedness. The responsibilities may increase or decrease or change over time depending on the care recipient's or loved one's changing needs. And caregivers typically learn as they go. They're not formally trained. We're often put into this role unexpectedly and may not have the understanding of exactly what services to provide and how to provide them. And that's why education and training is important. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Here's a snapshot of the individuals who receive care. 41% are a parent, 29% a special needs child, 20% someone else, and 18% spouse or partner. There are many benefits of caregiving, both to the caregiver and the care recipient. For the care recipient, caregiving helps them retain their quality of life and independence to the extent possible. With a family caregiver involved, it enables care recipients to avoid, to the extent possible, living in a group setting. It can reduce depression and better enable care recipients to self-manage their chronic conditions. Caregiving also has tremendous benefits for caregivers by helping increase their self-confidence, life satisfaction, and fulfillment from helping others. It enables individuals to start or add to social networks of friendships associated with caregiving. So people can exchange ideas, best practices, can share their own experiences. And it can help individuals feel needed and useful, giving back to recipients. It also helps individuals learn and develop new skills. And these skills can include learning resilience, patience, and problem solving, which are helpful for every part of our lives. Studies show that Black and African American caregivers cope better with caregiving duties despite the increased demands, viewing caregiving positively as a privilege to care for family and loved ones. Caregiving can provide a sense of purpose, enabling caregivers to feel good about their role, and showing up to serve others is seen as a privilege. This sense of purpose or meaning in caregiving can be defined in various ways, including religious terms, family expectations, and giving back to the community. Now, on the flip side, it's important to acknowledge that there are challenges associated with caregiving. As a loved one's medical needs increase and caregiving duties expand over time, caregivers may experience physical, emotional, social, and/or financial hardships. They may not know where to turn for support or have someone to talk to who understands their experience. Sometimes family caregivers don't identify themselves as caregivers. They may not recognize that their roles are being defined or redefined as the demands of the situation changes. And it may be difficult for some caregivers to accept that they're now responsible for parents who raised and cared for them. These shifting roles are very complicated, and they can become even more complicated for families with histories of unresolved conflict. 67% of family caregivers have reported finding balancing work and life duties as difficult. Nearly 1 in 5 caregivers report fair or poor health, and nearly 2 in 5 have at least 2 chronic diseases. One study reported that nearly 2 in 10 employed caregivers had to stop working, while 4 in 10 had to reduce their workload. And more than 1/4 of Black and African American caregivers report having no family, friends, or neighbors to help them. 1/3 of Black and African American caregivers report being more isolated. It's experiencing mental and physical health strain due to caregiving. Systemic injustices and historical discrimination have deterred many Black and African American caregivers from seeking formal support services. And certainly there are insufficient culturally responsive formal supports and caregiver trainings available. So how can communities better support caregivers? Well, caregiving is very difficult, as we discussed, and it's not a task that we can or should do alone. We all need support. Help with errands, chores, and other tasks can be very helpful. Checking in or providing emotional and social support, sending a text, calling someone, providing food can be really meaningful. Connecting caregivers with respite care, support groups, and helplines can also be similarly helpful. Peer support can provide strength. It can provide assistance with techniques for stress management. Um, Individuals can share caregiving best practices, and these shared experiences can help each of us, providing encouragement for the other and normalizing the caregiving experience. Sharing care education and training programs on caregiving strategies can be especially helpful, especially to untrained, new, or struggling caregivers, and encouraging caregivers to seek faith supports, community assistance, or mental health services can be helpful, and making sure that caregivers are managing their own healthcare needs. We often forget to provide for our own healthcare while caring for those we love. How can providers better support caregivers? Establishing relationships with trusted community leaders, recruiting, promoting, and supporting a diverse interdisciplinary workforce that understands and represents the culture of the community, partnering with community-based organizations and faith-based organizations to disseminate informational materials and offer family meetings to caregivers. Family meetings can be particularly helpful where there are several family members caring for a loved one, and perhaps they have some different ideas about how to provide care and when to provide care, and those family meetings can help iron out those differences so people have an opportunity to discuss opportunities to best support their loved one. Providing culturally and linguistically competent in-office materials for caregivers, delivering information and training, understanding that Black and African Americans are not the same, they're not homogenous. Every caregiver, care recipient, and family has different needs and desires. Acknowledge and listen to each caregiver to meaningfully and appropriately address their needs. How can societal supports help? Well, we need to improve our systems, certainly, to better integrate diverse family caregivers and older adults into healthcare and social systems, and systems that reach caregivers in a more person and family-centered approach. And this includes expanding the national caregiver support infrastructure to reach diverse communities across a broader range of racial, ethnic, linguistic, and cultural backgrounds for people who have not previously been connected to such resources. Increasing financial and workplace protections, including paid leave for caregivers, financial planning and education, caregiver tax credits, other reimbursements to offset the costs of family caregiving. The Administration for Community Living has a national strategy to support family caregivers, which is a significant step towards achieving these goals. They already have over 350 commitments to specific actions by 15 federal agencies to increase outreach, education, awareness, and programs designed to support family caregivers. Best practice tips and takeaways. Ask for help when you need it. Support is available to help managing caregiving duties and maintain health and mental wellness. Talk to someone. Reach out to a trusted friend, family member, support group, peer leader, or faith leader, and advocate for loved ones. Honor that you are the expert for you and your family. Be curious, ask questions, gather information, and become educated. I'm now going to turn back to the ethicist. As you recall from the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned a letter written to the ethicist from a woman who claimed that her husband had dementia, although there was no evidence of that. And she asked the ethicist advice and permission whether she could leave her husband rather than stay and provide caregiving services. And this, in part, is the ethicist's response. In a loving relationship, You support your spouse through hard times, including illness and decline, because you can't easily imagine doing otherwise. The shared experiences and memories of a life together enable you to find warmth amid the cold spells. You talk about how your husband has changed. It's also possible that you've changed. If medical professionals haven't diagnosed dementia, consider that your personal assessment could be mistaken. Either way, it sounds as if your worry isn't so much that you'll become a caregiver rather, is that you won't have a loving relationship with the person you would be caring for. Before you sever ties, I would encourage you to explore couples counseling attuned to the challenges of dementia. See if you can cultivate your own well-being while finding activities that play to your husband's strengths. You should be able to grieve what is being lost and acknowledge whatever moments of resentment you feel without shame. I'm not saying that you're required to sacrifice your well-being to his. The special obligations that we have to our loved ones are rooted in the value we place on our relationships with them, with all the resilience and fragility of those relationships. Still, I hope you'll figure out a way to balance your needs with his. That doesn't mean going down with the ship. It means trying to find a way to keep the ship afloat. So very profound words, I think, from the ethicist. And we don't know what the letter writer did or has done, but we do know that caregiving is nuanced, complex, and every situation is different. And resources and supports are available, and I'll share some at the end of this presentation. I'm now going to turn to the next part of the presentation, which is elder abuse. And as I shift focus, I want to be really clear that most caregivers do their very best for loved ones and have the best intentions. A very small percentage of caregivers may have malintent and want to cause harm, to steal or otherwise abuse a loved one. Some caregivers, however, may lack the knowledge, the skills, the ability to care for a loved one. Many don't have training, and caregiving duties may be thrust upon them. Others may not have the desire, the willingness, or resources to care for someone. And there may be a complicated family dynamic between the caregiver and care recipient that impacts the relationship. Most of the time, these issues don't lead to abuse, but sometimes they do. Saying something mean, being too rough, taking money. Most abuse is committed by family or those closest to us, and that's just the fact. It's uncomfortable to discuss, but it's important to understand so that we can prevent it and intervene if it does occur. It's estimated that 1 in 10 older adults experiences some form of abuse each year. And of the 6.7 million people with dementia in this country, 1 in 3 will experience some form of abuse. And yet only 1 in 24 cases of abuse is reported, which is a really troubling statistic because it means that most older people are not getting the help and supportive resources they need to prevent abuse and mitigate harms. And the most common reason for non-disclosure and underreports is that the abuser is a family member, a chosen family member, a trusted other, someone in the older adults world, and older adults are very reluctant to report family member offenders. They may feel shame and embarrassment that someone so close to them has caused harm, and they may not want to publicly reveal those very private, intimate facts of abuse. They may be fearful that a report will result in retaliation or worse treatment. Some older adults live with family members and are dependent upon them for food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities. And they may be concerned that if they complain, they may be evicted, left homeless, or placed in a nursing home. We also know from the Surgeon General's report last year that social isolation and loneliness is a huge concern across the life course, but even more so for older adults whose reserves and resources may erode into later life. And an older adult may prefer to have an abusing family member in their life than no one at all. Separately, some older adults may fear that they won't be believed if they do report abuse. And others may have advanced dementia. And think of someone maybe in a nursing home who may not be able to recognize abuse when it does occur, that someone has stolen from them or yelled at them or physically harmed them. And even if they do recognize it, they may lack the faculties to communicate that abuse to the appropriate authorities. For some African American and Black elders, there may be reluctance to report abuse because culturally there's a strong sense of loyalty to both the immediate and extended family, and a reluctance to discuss private matters outside of the family. Family obligations often take precedence over personal needs, facilitating tolerance, potentially, of an abusive situation and a reluctance to acknowledge abusive behaviors and report abuse. And many community members don't trust societal systems given histories of racism and oppression and prefer to utilize informal support networks or institutions with strong community acceptance. Let's turn now to the definition of abuse. And this is a general definition from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Elder abuse is an intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult. And the older adult is defined as someone age 60 or older, with the abuse occurring at the hands of a caregiver or a person the older adult trusts. Every state has some definition or multiple definitions of abuse. And while there are variations across jurisdictions, most definitions are largely consistent. But what does differ in life and in practice are our cultural, contextual, and interpersonal perceptions of what constitutes abuse. So what one person may consider to be abuse may not rise to the level of what another person may consider to be abuse, notwithstanding statutory definitions. And lots of factors go into this: faith, family, context, community, history, experiences. They're all relevant, and they impact our understandings of abuse. Conceptual understandings may also vary based upon differing cultural and social norms among communities, resulting in diverse definitions, perceptions of, and responses to mistreatment. Older people in general are all different and unique, and individuals who experience abuse will often have different needs, goals, preferences, and values in dealing with abuse, especially if it is committed by a family member. So it's very important that approaches to addressing abuse should be person-centered, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed. On this next slide, I have listed some approaches to working with older adults who experience abuse. And at the National Center on Elder Abuse, we have a series of worksheets to assist providers in working with older adults who've been abused, separately on trauma-informed principles, person-centered principles, and culturally responsive principles, and other fact sheets as well. But here I've distilled some of those into this right here in front of you, into this slide. Foster a safe environment and build rapport and trust. Approach clients without preconceived assumptions about who they are and what they can do. Meet clients where they are and enable them to express their concerns. Elicit the client's preferences, values, needs, and objectives. Affirm a client's concerns and feelings through active listening. Provide accommodations, whether that's for someone who's limited English proficient or someone who may have sensory impairments, someone, for example, who may be hearing impaired or visually impaired. Show cultural humility always, and use strengths-based approaches to identify strengths and empower clients. So let's turn now to the types of mistreatment. And it's important to note that elder abuse can happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone. It can take a number of forms, including physical abuse, which is the use of physical force or coercion that may result in injury. And it can manifest as hitting, beating, biting, kicking, slapping, or any number of other things. This is not an exhaustive or an exclusive list, just some examples. But physical abuse also includes any unlawful, unnecessary, or excessive use of force or coercion to confine or restrain an older adult. And that can include force feeding, physical punishment, physical restraint, or chemical restraint, like using medication to over-medicate someone. Psychological abuse is the infliction of anguish, pain, or distress through verbal or nonverbal means and includes threats, harassment, insults, or isolation. Sexual abuse is non-consensual sexual contact of any kind, including threats, harassment, assault, or battery. Financial abuse is misappropriation of someone's money, property, or assets. Neglect is the refusal or failure to provide for all or any part of one's obligations towards an older adult, like food, clothing, money management, medication management. And self-neglect is the refusal or inability of someone to take care of their own healthcare and financial needs. Multiple forms of abuse can occur. If you see someone experiencing one type of abuse, it's not unlikely that they may be experiencing another type of abuse as well. As you can well imagine, the impacts of abuse are quite significant. Medical and mental health consequences, increased cognitive decline, social isolation and disconnection, poverty and homelessness. There's a 3 times greater mortality rate for older adults who've been abused than those who have not, and billions of dollars a year are lost attributable to elder abuse. So I'm going to go through now some signs of abuse, and this is not a complete list. They're just some common examples. It's important to note, especially as to physical signs and emotional signs, that there may be some other causal source for these signs. For example, an individual may have a medical condition, a mental health condition, a cognitive impairment, or maybe on a medication that may be resulting in these signs of abuse. Or perhaps some of these signs can be related to age. So it's important to differentiate those other factors before considering whether the signs that you're observing could be related to abuse. But some common physical signs of abuse include dehydration or weight loss, missing daily living aids, unexplained injuries, bruises, cuts, or sores, torn, stained, or bloody underclothing, unattended medical needs, and unexplained sexually transmitted diseases. And interestingly, there's a body of literature on differentiating accidental from intentional bruises. Intentionally inflicted bruises often occur around the head, the neck, and the face. They're often larger in size than accidental bruises. You may observe patterns of injury like a handprint mark, and you may observe bruises in various stages of healing. Turning now to emotional and behavioral signs of abuse, I would repeat the same admonitions I mentioned earlier, that this could be related to another causal source. So rule those out. But the other thing is that we all experience and express strain or stress or abuse in different ways. So it's important to look at individuals' pattern of behavior or course of conduct over time. Has it changed? And if so, what is the reason for that change? Is it one of those other causal factors I mentioned earlier, or is it related to abuse? And some common emotional behavioral signs of abuse are increased fear or anxiety, isolation from friends or family, unusual changes in behavior or sleep, and withdrawal from normal activities. And now turning to financial signs, again, these are just some examples. Fraudulent signatures on financial documents, unusual or sudden changes in spending patterns, and unpaid bills. Next, I'm going to talk about the risk factors of abuse, because it's really important to understand the risks that may expose us to abuse, because once we understand the risks, perhaps we can reduce those risks and mitigate the likelihood of abuse occurring. And we focus on this model. It's called the Abuse Prevention Intervention Model, which is a great way to understand the relationship between an older adult and a trusted other within the context of their relationship. And you can see on the screen, those are the 3 main domains here. But there are risk factors within each of these three domains that independently or in combination with other risk factors could indicate or are associated with an increased risk of abuse. For the older adult, chronic medical conditions, mental health impairments, cognitive deficits, prior trauma exposure, functional deficits, stress and poor coping mechanisms. For the trusted other, economic dependency, emotional dependency, substance abuse, childhood abuse, and in cases of financial abuse, there may be a sense of entitlement where the individual believes they're entitled to the older adult's money or assets. Looking at the context of their relationship, what is the level of social connectedness of each of these individuals to the community, to family, to neighbors, to faith networks? Cultural norms. What are the cultural norms for each of these individuals, and how does it impact their definitions, perceptions of, and responses to mistreatment? And what is the context of the relationship of this older adult and this trusted other? Is it perhaps, for example, an adult child and an older parent, and maybe they have had a conflictual relationship over time, with some families have conflicts, and perhaps these issues have never been resolved or appropriately addressed, and they've simmered over time. And maybe the older adult in later life has some care needs, and now this adult child is called upon to provide care. It could become a difficult situation where this adult child, perhaps they don't have the skills or the knowledge to care for that older adult parent, but they also may lack the desire or willingness to care for them. And that potentially could be a situation that could move a caregiving situation into an abusive one. I also want to go over some other risk factors, and these specific to the Black and African American community: societal and systemic risk factors, lifetime exposure to racism and segregation, which can contribute to accumulated stress and associated health disparities; relational risk factors like generational differences in attitudes regarding relationships, power dynamics, and respect; relational risk factors, going to increased caregiver burden is next; individual risk factors for Black and African American women who are at the intersection of multiple diverse identities, being gender, race, and age; isolation from services, including medical care and family members. But there are protective factors which are really important involving resilience. Traditions of embracing community networks, including extended family, neighbors, church, and service organizations, have provided Black and African American elders with a sense of belonging, support, and safety through historical challenges. Religious affiliations have been an important source of strength and a protective buffer during times of distress. Family loyalty and unity has long been a source of resilience, and older adults are revered within the community, admired for their wisdom, strength, and dignity. So now let's turn to interventions and preventions. Within the community, Adult Protective Services is the social services agency that investigates allegations of abuse and neglect and exploitation. In facilities, long-term care ombudsmen act as they act at the behest of residents, and they advocate for residents and for resident rights. Abuse in facilities can also be reported to regulatory agencies. They have regulatory oversight. Law enforcement is an appropriate resource as well to report abuse. Legal aid is available in most communities, and it's a terrific resource for prevention and intervention. For prevention, they can assist individuals with developing advanced directives, so individuals can record their preferences and values as to healthcare and other things if at some later time they're unable to do so. Similarly, individuals can execute powers of attorney, designating someone as their agent to act on their behalf. If at some later time they're unable to make those decisions. Education and awareness, very important. Financial literacy is very important, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has terrific assets, terrific publications and assets related to financial literacy. Elder abuse multidisciplinary teams are teams of experts across disciplines who meet on a regular basis to address complex cases of abuse. And they're available in many communities. They are differently constituted across communities depending upon the community need and available resources. But members can include adult protective services, they can include prosecutors, civil attorneys, victims advocates, ombudsman, and other agencies as well, all in service to supporting older adults and helping find resolutions to cases of abuse. So, social support, community, and faith-based networks are among the most important interventions and preventions available, and certainly community-based interventions. Certainly, there are too few culturally responsive supports available, and those that are available often don't focus on the unique needs of diverse elders who have been abused. Interventions have to resonate in order to work. Culturally appropriate practice and intervention should be multicultural, multi-level, and multifaceted, designed to increase familial, social, and community support for elders. And these programs should be interdisciplinary with an emphasis on the holistic view for understanding the individual, family, community, and the system and social inequalities and injustices that exist in the older victim's life. And a couple articles have suggested community-based education strategies for abuse prevention for Black and African American older adults. And these programs use local churches, community centers, barbershops, and beauty salons as a focus for prevention strategies. Community-based respite programs to support caregivers can also be helpful. They can be organized by churches, community centers, community-based organizations, and nonprofits. Sororities and fraternities, social clubs, and college alumni associations are also avenues for education and abuse prevention. At the National Center on Elder Abuse, we have a number of tools and publications that are available for you. I've listed 3 here on the screen. And Angela, if you could put some other ones in the chat and these links to those, that would be really helpful. These are tips and tools for providing culturally competent, responsive care to older people who experience abuse. We have a research brief on mistreatment of African American elders. And we have a number of publications dealing with faith communities. This one is bringing together faith and safety for older adults. Here are some caregiving resources that are available. Just a few, there are many that are available. I've listed the Alzheimer's Association Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Caregiving, the Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Caregiving, the Family Caregiver Alliance, Caregiving Resource Center, and National Caucus and Center on Black Aging. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you need anything at the National Center on Elder Abuse. We are here, we are available to you, and we're here to support you. And thank you so much for enabling me to present today. I truly appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori, for such a thoughtful presentation. I'm a caregiver, so I want to thank you again on behalf of all of the caregivers who've joined us this afternoon. And so I want to dive right into some questions here. We've got some great questions in the chat, but I'd like to kick us off just if I may. Since the caregiving community is expected to grow, and it's considered a public health service, what advice can you give us that we might share with our families early on before we become a caregiver? What can we talk about? We just celebrated Thanksgiving. Can we develop caregiving plans? I mean, what would be your advice?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, I think that that is a good approach. The preventions that I mentioned, becoming informed, becoming educated, reaching out to the resources that I listed earlier and are available to you. working with organizations like legal aid. They can assist with advanced directives and powers of attorney. Planning for the future is a good thing. I know some people may be reluctant to do that. Those are difficult conversations to have, but those can be very helpful tools. Just to have that conversation, discussion, just to make sure that people's preferences and values are honored at a time perhaps when they may not be able to express them.
Okay, thank you. And that's a great segue. And jumping to the chat, one of the questions reads, are the tools and resources that you shared with us free?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
all
But
right.
thank you for asking that question.
Okay, okay, thank you. The next question asks, what is respite care? And again, is respite care free? And does it depend on the state and where you live?
That's a really good question. And respite care is when a caregiver perhaps needs like a little time to themselves, a little space away from caregiving. And respite care enables them to have perhaps a day or a few days or a week where someone else can come in and provide care. And that can be maybe a family member. It can be perhaps someone who is a caregiver that's provided from in-home supportive services. It's I don't know from state to state what services are available, but it would be important to check with some of the resources that I left, and that perhaps can provide some more direction about specific resources that are available for you.
Okay, and just to build on that a little bit, the next question asks, who does the caregiver turn to if they are being abused?
That's a good question. And is being abused by the care recipient?
I'm assuming, yeah, it's in the chat
Okay.
here. Yeah.
That's a very good question. And sometimes people with dementia, and I don't know if we're talking about someone with dementia, but sometimes people with dementia may have conditions that, and I'm not an expert in this area to be clear, but they can sometimes be aggressive. And it's important to understand that it's the disease that's causing this aggression and not the individual, and to distinguish those two, and also to reach out for education and supports. I know that locally, I live in Los Angeles, we have a family caregiver resource center, and they provide lots of supports and resources to provide information, and those other resources do as well, on how to address loved ones who perhaps can be aggressive. Because it is an issue, but there are ways to address it. So gathering that information would be very important.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question asks, when speaking to Black and African American caregivers, can you give some guidance on the Black male caregiver? That data doesn't often speak to the challenges and the plight of the Black male caregiver, and we know he exists.
That's a great question. And I recently read a study that, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think that there's a greater number of Black and African American men who provide care than we know. And yes, there are issues relating to that, and I don't remember offhand the specifics. I can provide that information though, and I will do that. Angie, I can send that to you,
Okay,
that information.
okay, thank you, Lori, and we'll get that
Great
out.
question.
Thank you very much. The next question in our chat asks, just wondering if encouraging a spouse to stay and care for a husband will create potential abuse if she doesn't want to care for him.
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, that could be a situation that could be associated with an increased risk of abuse. Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand the resources that are available, access those resources, and options. For example, are there other family members available who can provide care? Are there other alternatives? Are in-home supportive services an option? There are a number of options. It may not be a preferred option, but assisted living, or it may be appropriate for an individual, but it's important to explore options, but actually recognizing that you don't have a desire or willingness to care for someone is really important. And once you acknowledge it, it's important to gather the tools in order to address that. Thank you for that question.
And thank you, Lori. And the next question asks if you could please define what respite care. What is respite care and how do I get it?
Okay. So respite care is sort of like a period of time. Well, let's say if you're a caregiver and providing care to someone and you need time off, you just need a break. We know caregiving can be challenging. We talked about that. And if you do need some time off to yourself, to take care of yourself, to attend to your own needs, your health, your mental health, just have time away. There are opportunities for someone else to come in and provide care for your loved one. And this could be something that you arrange informally with a family member who provides care while you step away for a while, or someone in your community, someone in the faith community who can help. Or there are services, in-home supportive services that you can access through your county or through the state, and help reach out for those services. And more information is available on those sites and resources that I provided. They also, a number of them have access to local resources, local support groups, and local helplines. And which are really important it's so important to ask for help when you need it and to reach out to friends or community members, faith networks, and also to these resources, to give them a call, talk to them, engage in peer group discussions if you feel comfortable with that, because that can provide that added layer of support that is much needed.
Okay. And then Lori, the next question asks, do most employee assistance programs, EAP in parentheses, offer caregiver assistance?
That's a very good question. And I don't know the answer, but I know that there's a significant effort by the Administration for Community Living to provide that support and those resources. So again, that's something that I can look into, and I can send the response to Angie. But thank you very much for that question.
Okay. And my pleasure. And then let's see, we've got a question here about the VA. Would the VA be a viable organization to reach out to for caregiver support?
That's such a great question, and thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. The VA is a great organization to reach out to, and they do have caregiver resources and supports. And I believe they also have a helpline. So definitely a great idea, and thank you for sharing that.
Okay, and thank you. And Lori, you mentioned several federal agencies, I'm assuming, are invested in caregiver supports and the needs of caregivers. Are some of those agencies we might might recognize? Can you speak to some of those agencies?
There are 15 agencies that are at least 15 that are engaged in this process. And the Administration for Community Living certainly is one of them. And there are others as well. There are a number of agencies involved in some form to increase awareness, outreach. The Administration for Community Living itself awarded $20 million in grants to foster advancement in caregiver support programs. So this is a process, but it's an ongoing process and continuing need. So yes, thank you for asking that question.
And thank you. And I'd like to encourage our audience to submit their questions. We've got some fabulous questions here, so keep them coming. The next question asks, can you discuss the availability and necessity of caregiver support groups?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, if you go to like one of those resources like the Alzheimer's Association, for example, you can go online or you can call them and you can access caregiver support groups, virtual support groups, in-person support groups in your area. And they can be a terrific resource, and you can contact someone, find out more information about it, exactly what's involved, just so you feel comfortable engaging and knowing, as much as you can about it before you participate, or perhaps trying it out and seeing if that's something that may be helpful for you.
Okay, thank you. And we are almost at 2 o'clock, and we have just, let's see. Lori, the next question, someone asked if you can speak to, again, the difference between mistreatment and abuse, that they sound very similar, but I'm confused here.
That's a very good question. And if you ask different researchers, you might get a different answer. Mistreatment, I think of as sort of a broader category of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. But, researchers may have different responses. So.
Okay, all right. All right. And then let's see. The next question asks, how do we contact our state and or federal resources for caregiver support groups?
If you go to the websites, the links that I provided, like for the Alzheimer's Association or the caregiver resources, if you click on those links, that will take, and you can Google it also, and get access. You just go right onto the site, and probably even on the homepage, they'll probably mention caregiving resources.
Okay. Okay. And then, wow, we have some great questions here. The next question asks, can you please speak to some incentives available for the unpaid family caregiver?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Certainly, the incentives, they can be drawn from like internally from like our being part of a family and feeling that family need to care for loved ones. Incentives can be, faith-based or community-based. I'm wondering if there are other incentives someone is thinking of. I mean, as a family caregiver myself, I derive, just for me, it's very important for me to provide care to people in my life. It's a need, but it's also a privilege. I feel very strongly about that. In terms of financial incentives, in-home supportive services may be available. And you may connect with them to see if you can get some form of reimbursement if you're eligible.
Okay. Thank you. And we're at 1:59, and I want to just leave a moment, Lori, to ask you, what would you like us to do now? I know education is really important, but for those of us who are caregivers, to continue to educate ourselves, and then we know at some point in time, the holiday season is a great time to sit down with our families and discuss our caregiving plan, and try to plot out our caregiving journey as a family. What else would you like us to do to move forward in our caregiving journey? Something you said resonated with me, or former First Lady Rosalind Carter said that we will either be caregivers, I'm paraphrasing, or we will need care. And with that, what else should we be thinking about as we think about needing care or being a caregiver?
Thank you so much for that question. I think that it's important to know that resources and supports are available, and you're not in this alone. And sometimes it may feel that way, but please reach out to your family, friends, to the community, to the church, for supportive resources, and get the support that you need, because everybody has their own individual needs. So that's really important. And I'm going to also mention one thing in terms of abuse. The most important prevention and intervention is social support, faith support, family support, community support. So surround yourself with those supportive networks if you can, or access them, because that definitely can reduce the risk of abuse.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori, very much for joining us. What an interesting and heavy topic, but very necessary. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope this won't be a one-off. Thank you very much to our audience for joining us. Your questions were terrific. We look forward to seeing you soon and hope everybody has a good day and a great holiday season.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Laurie.
Good
Edge
afternoon.
out our survey.
It's yours.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. Could you take a moment to complete our survey? As soon as the webinar has ended, you will receive an email asking you to, not an email necessarily, but you'll receive information asking to complete a brief survey. Will help us know how to better serve you moving forward. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
Have
Thank
a
you
good
for joining
afternoon.
us.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.